Every time I record new lectures, I say, oh, I'm going to cut it up into smaller bits and have more that are shorter, but I most of the time end up cramming in more information. So hopefully, yeah, you love that information, and I'll try to keep this to reasonable length. So we're continuing our foray to the back of the book in chapter 20, which is having to do with neoplasms and cancer. So I will talk in the 4 lectures for this chapter. I will talk about the material that's in the book, but the last one particularly having to do with the role of physical therapy in cancer, I'm going to veer off from the book a little bit because I wanted to include some more specialized information for us particularly. So the beginning of chapter 20 starts with a review of normal cells, and I think that's a nice little 3 or 4 paragraphs to read about how cells differentiate and what kind of receptors they have. A lot of the things that we know about cells now has to do with things that have been found out in the course of cancer treatment. A lot of the things we know about the immune system have been found out in the course of cancer research. So it's a really big area. Cancer can affect any area or tissue of our body. It's been known to be around for a very long time, since prehistoric times. There's some interesting articles that I've seen where they talk about finding tumors in dinosaur fossils and that sort of thing. So this isn't a new thing, and it's not an easy, uncomplicated thing, so we're just going to dive in. Let's just dive in. So cancer is the term used to describe a collection of diseases. It's not just one thing. So by definition, uncontrolled division of abnormal cells that have the ability to invade other tissues. That's the definition of cancer. But it's a disease of the genes. So at the beginning of chapter 20, when they're talking about how changes in DNA can alter cell structure and function or cause cell death, the genes are in the DNA in every cell in the body. We talked about this in the last module. The DNA molecule carries the genetic instructions, or the genes, for growth, development, functioning, and reproduction of all living organisms. The genes also control the encoding and production of proteins and RNA, and DNA replication is a part of cell division. So sometimes during DNA replication there are mistakes or coding errors. So what should happen is that there's a mistake, there's a problem, the body detects it, or the cell detects it and kills itself off. But it doesn't always happen. So what happens if there are coding errors that aren't caught? So coding errors may happen during DNA replication or because of damage, and we'll talk about different things that might damage DNA. There are DNA repair processes built into our cells to identify and repair these errors. But if the errors are not repaired, then the DNA becomes mutated and the error becomes permanent, because the cells are always copying and copying and copying the DNA. So it's like when you have a photocopy of something and you make another copy of it, and the pictures or the diagrams get darker and darker, or the print gets less and less distinct, and finally you're getting copies that are errors of copies, and then copies of those errors. So the DNA mutation can cause the production of faulty proteins that give different messages than a normal cell. So we know that DNA is copied to RNA, which is then decoded on the ribosomes and made into proteins, and the proteins go out and do all the structural and functional things that our body needs. So if we have a faulty protein, that could be a problem. So as the abnormal cell with the DNA mutation continues to divide uncontrollably, it can form a neoplasm or a tumor. So not all tumors are cancer. So any new growth is called a neoplasm, neo meaning new and plasma meaning growth. So you might have a tumor that's not cancerous, and we'll talk about the distinction. So a neoplasm is a cellular growth that no longer responds to normal genetic control. So there's something wrong with the way it's reproducing. The cell continues to reproduce without the need for it to reproduce. That's what produces the tumor mass. Normally our cells will reproduce in response to signals in the body that we need to make more of that cell. It might be a hormonal signal, it might be some other kind of chemical signal. But in neoplasms, the cell's just going crazy. We don't need them, but there are more of them being made. A neoplasm, even a non-cancerous one, can deprive the other cells around it of nutrition because it's sort of out of control growth, and so it's taking up resources. So neoplasms may or may not consist of atypical or immature cells. And the characteristics of each tumor depend on the type of cell from which the tumor originally arises and the unique structure or growth pattern of that individual tumor. So tumors are classified as benign, which is the name for non-cancerous tumors. This is not cancer. They can be called pre-malignant or precancerous. Sometimes it's also called in situ neoplasm or carcinoma in situ. And this is a group of abnormal cells that could become cancer. It doesn't mean it will become cancer, but it has the potential. Malignant or cancerous tumors, these cells have the ability to invade and destroy nearby tissues and may spread to other parts of the body. So these are the bad guys, really. So usually cancer treatment is focused on them. So just a little terminology from really the first page of the chapter. Differentiation is each cell type, we have a complete version of our DNA in every cell type, but each cell type in our body differentiates and carries out particular functions. So we have cells that differentiate into cardiac cells, cells that differentiate into epithelial cells, cells that differentiate into neurons, cells that differentiate into blood cells. So the structure of each individual cell type reflects the function of the tissue. Mitosis is the part of the cell cycle where the cell splits into two daughter cells, and it requires genetic control, DNA and RNA. A mutation is if the DNA in a parent cell is altered and passed on. The offspring cells will carry the mutation. So this is the bad copy that keeps getting copied. Apoptosis is programmed cell death. We talked about this in the first chapter, and it's controlled by genetic elements. So ideally, if we have a weird mutation, the cell says, well, something's wrong, I better just destroy myself. But if that part of the DNA that detects that is affected, then maybe that won't happen, and you'll develop a tumor. So carcinogenesis is the process whereby normal cells are transformed into cancer cells. So all cancer cells start out as normal cells. The process of carcinogenesis is going to vary greatly depending on what stage you're in. So cancer is thought to be a multifactorial disease because environmental effects can change the path of carcinogenesis, changes in gene expression can change the path, and sometimes infection can cause carcinogenesis, like cervical and hepatic cancers, and we'll talk about individual disease agents at some point. So some cancers have well-established risk factors. We know what they are. There's a lot of research going on, and there's lots of medical history that we can look at, and some of them we're not sure. So in carcinogenesis, you have some sort of initiating factor. It might be first irreversible changes in cellular DNA. And the initiating factors don't create an active neoplasm. They just set the stage for it to potentially happen. Then there's some exposure to promoters. So promoters can include hormones or other endogenous chemicals and environmental chemicals. So in a slide later on, we'll talk about the incidence of cancer in men and women. And two of the most common cancers are prostate cancer in men and breast cancer in women because of the influence that hormones have to promote carcinogenesis. So those are the tissues involved are tissues that are particularly affected by hormones, and so they have the potential for more change. So as the carcinogenesis goes on, you have less differentiation of cells and increased rate of mitosis or lack of programmed cell death, apoptosis. And dysplasia or anaplasia might be evident. So dysplasia is those weird deformed kind of cells, and anaplasia is like a cell without a cell that's not going to go on to divide. And the whole process might lead to tumor development. So lots of different things can cause DNA mutations. So there are different types of assaults on our body that are potential causes of DNA mutations. And when you're thinking about prevention, it's a good idea to think of these categories. So the 4 primary categories are genetic inheritance, environmental carcinogens, lifestyle choices, and infectious agents. So some of those things we have control of, and some of them we don't. In reality, all of the 4 primary categories of assaults are interrelated. So you can have like a genetic predisposition, augmented by environmental, augmented by lifestyle choices, augmented by infectious agents. They can all be interrelated and play together in the development of cancer. So genetic inheritance accounts for only 5 to 10% of all cancers. So either you've inherited damaged DNA from your parents, one or both of your parents. You could also inherit certain genes that increase susceptibility to certain cancers. Some of those have been identified and you can be tested for them. You might also inherit in your genetic complement that you get from your parents a DNA repair process that is just not that robust. So it doesn't find those mutations and correct them, or find those copy errors and correct them. So there are certain types of cancer that tend to recur in family generations: breast cancer, colon cancer, ovarian cancer, uterine cancer, thyroid cancer, and pancreatic cancer. So it's really important to note that inheriting a predisposing mutation does not mean that you will get cancer. It just means that you're at an increased risk for developing cancer. So just because you have the genetic inheritance, that's just one factor, and it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to develop cancer. Environmental carcinogens, there is an international agency that's International Agency for Research on Cancer, and I have more information about it later. And the U.S. National Toxicology Program and the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency have ongoing efforts to identify and educate the public on environmental carcinogens. So the IARC has a classification of agents, and it's sort of the most widely used system, and it's classified by how potentially carcinogenic it is. So group 1 is carcinogenic to humans, 2A probably, 2B possibly, and you know, those are pretty vague, but there you go. Group 3 is unclassifiable, so they don't know one way or the other. And group 4 is probably not. It's probably okay. So basically they classify based on the strength of scientific evidence, not on the level of risk with exposure. So there could be something like air pollution, that there's scientific evidence that shows that it is a risk for cancer, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you have more cancer risk with exposure to air pollution. So over 900 agents have been classified, and over 100 of those 900 are placed in group 1, which is carcinogenic to humans. And so among many others, obviously, ones that you might potentially contact on a daily basis: air pollution, benzene, which might be in a lot of different paints, radiation, asbestos, diesel engine exhaust, particularly out of air pollution, radon, and tobacco, and that includes smoking, smokeless tobacco, and secondhand smoke. So lots of different things that have been classified in group 1 as carcinogenic to humans. And again, exposure to one of these doesn't necessarily mean you are going to get cancer, but there's the potential. So lifestyle choices, lots of research has shown the increased risk of cancer is directly related to tobacco use. Lung cancer, upper respiratory tract, all those other ones listed. Excessive alcohol use, a bunch of them listed there. And I have references listed which are at the end of the PowerPoint if you want to read up on those. Increased weight has a directly related cancer risk on those systems. Physical inactivity, colon cancer. And we know from the last module that physical inactivity has a lot of other consequences. Poor diet can be related to cancer. So lots of different lifestyle choices. So all of these things we can change. We can change tobacco use, alcohol use, overweight, inactivity, and a poor diet. We can change all those things, yay, because we don't have control over other things. Infectious agents, certain ones are known to cause or increase the risk of cancer. Human papillomavirus, HPV, increases the risk or causes cervical cancer, vaginal, vulval, penile, anal, rectal, and oropharyngeal cancers. There's a vaccine for that. Hepatitis A and B and C can increase the risk of liver cancer. HIV has certain cancers that it increases the risk of. And Epstein-Barr virus, nasopharyngeal cancers, and fast-growing lymphomas of a particular type. And so a lot of these infectious agents can be involved in carcinogenesis. So to reduce our risk, there are things we can do, there are things that we don't have control of, but we want to limit UV exposure from the sun or from tanning booths. Both of them can mutate your DNA. Getting regular medical and dental examinations so you are on top of things, and any changes that happen you'll know right away. Doing self-examination for lumps. Diet, increasing your fiber content, reducing fats, and 5 to 10 servings of fresh fruits and vegetables daily. Fresh fruits and vegetables contain antioxidants, which reduce changes in DNA. So there are some things we can do to help prevent the risk. It's not going to prevent it entirely, but it helps lower the risk. So there are our cell-mediated immunity that we talked about in Chapter 7 recognizes some tumor cells and destroys them. It just says, oh, this thing's out of hand, I got to get rid of it. We can get immunization for cervical cancer and hepatitis to reduce cancer risk from those infectious agents. As with many other immunizations, immunization saves lives. So it's important that we get these things. So the warning signs of cancer, unusual bleeding or discharge anywhere in the body. Obviously, if you have that going on, you need to get that checked out. Change in bowel or bladder habits. So that can be indicative of a lot of different things. It can be indicative of cancer. It can be indicative of some neurological disorders. So that is something that you should definitely check with your healthcare professional. A change in a wart or mole, particularly change in color, size, or shape. A sore that doesn't heal on the skin or in the mouth, anywhere. Unexplained weight loss. A lot of times unexplained weight loss is the only symptom. People just say, I don't know why I just keep losing weight, and then they have to go in and get it checked out. Anemia or low hemoglobin and persistent fatigue. Persistent cough or hoarseness without reason. And a lump, a solid lump, often painless in the breast or testes or really anywhere on the body. You should get it checked out. If you want to stay current in what's going on in cancer treatment and oncology, I have a list here of sort of the top cancer resources. And I have a slide for each one and their website. National Institutes of Health, the National Cancer Institute, has a ton of great information on their website. In fact, a lot of the research studies that I have in my references here came from that website. The National Comprehensive Cancer Network, American Cancer Society, World Health Organization, and the International Agency for Research on Cancer. And I'll tell you what each one of these guys do. So the National Cancer Institute is part of the National Institutes of Health. Tons of great information on the website. I have some links in the module, and a lot of the references that I have came from them. It was established in 1937, and it's the U.S. federal government's principal agency for cancer research and training. So the NCI coordinates the National Cancer Program, conducting and supporting research, training, health information, dissemination, other programs investigating the cause, diagnosis, prevention, treatment, and rehabilitation from cancer, and continuing care of cancer patients and the families of cancer patients. So the National Cancer Institute is a huge player in getting the right information. National Comprehensive Cancer Network is a nonprofit alliance of 27 leading cancer centers, and it's devoted to patient care, research, and education. Their mission is to improve the quality, effectiveness, and efficiency of cancer care so that patients can live better lives. So they're more on the patient care end of things. The National Cancer Institute is comprehensive. American Cancer Society, also sort of more on the patient care end, but they also fund and conduct research. And they have invested more than $4.6 billion in cancer research since 1946, which I think is awesome. There's tons of great information on their website, patient support, and spreading the word about prevention, which is great. Lots of research quoted on their website as well. The World Health Organization has a cancer division that sets norms and standards for cancer control, including development of evidence-based prevention, early diagnosis, screening, treatment, and palliative care programs. They promote monitoring and evaluation through registries and research that are tailored to the local disease burden and available resources in different areas of the world. The International Agency for Research on Cancer is a specialized area of the World Health Organization, and its objective is to promote international collaboration in cancer research and coordinate research across countries and organizations. So that's a pretty cool goal. So whole huge list of references which you can read through.